Have you ever wondered what happens in the empty halls of buildings after everyone goes home? The quiet janitor, sweeping the floors and emptying trash, might be the only witness to horrors no one else would believe. Tonight on Farcical Fears, we dive into 7 true, disturbing janitor horror stories, real accounts from night shifts, where shadows move on their own. Whispers echo through empty rooms, and secrets lurk behind every corner. These are the stories that will make you think twice before walking alone in a dark corridor. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because you won't want to miss any of the terrifying stories we uncover. Brace yourself, because what you're about to hear is real, and it will haunt you long after the lights go out. Let's move to our first story. It started on a Monday night. I was the night janitor at an old corporate office building downtown. A job I had taken because it paid decently and allowed me to be alone with my thoughts. Most people would find the work boring, but I liked the quiet. That was before I realized the quiet had a life of its own. At first it was small things. Doors left unlocked, even though I was certain I had locked them. Lights flickering in corridors I hadn't even entered. A faint smell of cleaning chemicals stronger than it should be. I thought it was just an old building with faulty wiring and lingering odors. The hum of the HVAC system often played tricks on me, too, making ordinary noises sound sinister in the empty halls. It was around the 3rd week on the job when I first noticed the whispers. I was mopping the main lobby floor at 1:42 a.m. My headphones off because I preferred the silence when I heard it. A faint, almost inaudible voice. At first I thought someone was talking on the phone, but the building was supposed to be empty. I stopped and listened. The voice was so soft I couldn't make out the words. It was coming from the floor above me. I ignored it at first, convincing myself it was the echo of the street outside, or a ventilation issue. But then it happened again the next night. And the night after that. This time, I heard it clearly. My name, James. James. I froze. My heart pounded. I was sure I had locked the stairwell door. Slowly, I walked toward the stairs, my flashlight cutting a narrow cone of light through the darkened hallway. When I reached the stairwell, it was empty. No one was there. No sound except the hum of the fluorescent lights above. The next week, the whispers grew more specific. It wasn't just my name anymore. It was instructions. Turn left. Stop. Look behind you. I couldn't tell if I was imagining it. I started keeping a small notebook in my pocket, jotting down what I heard each night. At first it was only once or twice an hour, but gradually, it became constant. The voice never spoke while I was outside, never during the day, only during the night shifts. One night, around 2:15 a.m., I was cleaning the executive offices. I had a long, narrow hallway to mop, stretching for almost 50 feet. Halfway through, I heard a whisper directly behind me. Turn around. I froze. Slowly I turned. No one was there, but I felt it a pressure, almost like someone was standing just outside my peripheral vision. I shook my head and tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, but then I saw the reflection in the glass wall panels. A shadow. Not mine. Not human-shaped exactly, but something moving against the lights. It vanished when I blinked. I began recording the nights on my phone, leaving it running on a tripod in the lobby. I thought if I had evidence, I could prove I wasn't losing my mind. On the first night of recording, nothing happened, or so it seemed. But the next morning, when I reviewed the footage, I noticed faint figures reflected in the glass, standing in corners where there should have been nothing. Sometimes they were static, sometimes they seemed to move toward me when my back was turned. Sleep became impossible. I started losing weight. I stopped answering calls from friends. The building became my entire world. I began hearing the whispers even when I wasn't inside. On my commute home, walking past the streetlights, I thought I heard someone mimic my footsteps. The paranoia was crushing. One night, determined to confront whatever it was, I followed the instructions the whispers gave me. They were precise. Go to the 5th floor. Enter the conference room. Look under the table. I obeyed, heart hammering, flashlight trembling in my hand. I entered the room. Under the conference table, I found nothing, only dust, cobwebs, and the faint outline of a shape scrawled in dirt. It looked like someone had knelt there. The dust swirled lightly, as if disturbed moments before. Though no one else had been in the building, the next few nights escalated. The whispers began to comment on my actions in real time. You shouldn't have moved that chair. The door was open too. Long, stop cleaning that corner. And then they started warning me. Don't go down the east corridor. Don't look in the mirrors. I ignored the warnings once, and I regretted it immediately. I was mopping near the east corridor when the lights flickered violently. A cold draft passed over me. I saw my reflection in the glass door, but it wasn't my own. My reflection's eyes were black, and it grinned at me. I stumbled back and nearly dropped the mop. From that night on, I couldn't touch the east corridor. Every time I passed near it, I could feel that same cold pressure at my back. The whispers became louder, almost urgent. You cannot leave us. You belong here. I started documenting everything in detail, writing logs, taking photos of shadows, recording audio. But when I reviewed them, the images often appeared distorted. Faces smeared in places I had not noticed, shadows forming humanoid shapes in corners that were empty. Audio recordings sometimes captured my own voice, saying things I didn't remember speaking by the end of the first month. The situation had become unbearable. I began hearing footsteps in parts of the building I had just cleaned. I would check, and nothing would be there. Doors I had closed properly were open. Items I had put away neatly were moved slightly. I started leaving small traps, bottles of water, tools, cleaning rags arranged in patterns. They would always be disturbed by the morning, though no one else had a key to the building. One night, I woke in the janitor's closet, though I had fallen asleep on the lobby floor. My phone was recording, but the footage was corrupted. The lights flickered above me. The whispers were louder than ever. They surrounded me, chanting my name in overlapping voices, fast and urgent. I tried to move, but I couldn't. It was as if the building itself had me pinned in place. The next morning, I called my supervisor and told him I couldn't continue. He looked concerned but said the building had been empty for years, and no other janitor had ever reported issues. He handed me a FILA, history of the building. That's when I realized something terrifying. Previous janitors had all disappeared without explanation. Their records were erased or labeled resigned, but interviews suggested they had quit suddenly. Never seen again. I tried to quit officially, but something followed me home. The whispers didn't stop. My apartment became a nightmare of shadows and strange reflections. Even the furniture seemed to move slightly when I wasn't looking. I couldn't escape the sensation that someone or something was always behind me. Watching, waiting. I eventually returned once more to the building with a friend for moral support. The east corridor was sealed off for renovations, but I knew it wasn't safe. The shadows lingered in my mind. I realized the whispers weren't just in the building. They had marked me. And that was when I truly understood the gravity of what I had witnessed. Some buildings don't just house people. They house memories of those who never leave. I never returned to night shifts. I changed cities. I changed jobs. But sometimes, when I walk past a quiet office building at night, I swear I hear a faint whisper in my ear, my name, and I freeze, heart pounding, knowing that some things never let go. Let's move to our second story. All began when I was hired as a night janitor for the old university library downtown. The building had been standing for over a century, a massive stone structure with high ceilings and narrow, echoing hallways. The students called it haunted, of course. They loved spinning tales about ghostly librarians and books that moved on their own. I never believed it, until that night. My first shift started like any other. I carried my cleaning supplies through the main hall, polished the worn wooden floors, and dusted the shelves lined with leather-bound books. The air smelled of old paper and dust, but there was a subtle undertone that I couldn't place, almost a metallic temps, like rust or iron, lingering faintly in the corners. By midnight, the building was empty. I turned on my flashlight and began my rounds, recording the shift on my phone, just in case something happened. I'd heard that strange things were sometimes captured on cameras, and although I didn't expect to see anything, it gave me a sense of control. That's when I noticed it, the first oddity. The library's oldest wing had a locked door, marked Restricted Archives. I had a key, and curiosity got the better of me. The door was cold metal, and when I opened it, the air that rushed past was ice. I shivered, stepping inside with my flashlight illuminating rows of dusty bookshelves. The room was silent, almost oppressively so. But then I heard it, a faint whisper, just at the edge of hearing. My heart jumped. I froze. It sounded like someone was murmuring my name, almost under their breath. Michael. Michael. I shook my head. No one's here, I whispered to myself. But the voice didn't stop. It moved around the room, echoing softly off the walls. I walked slowly toward a bookshelf, shining my light between the rows. The whispers stopped suddenly. Then, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. A book was lying open on the floor. Pages ruffled, as if someone had flipped them frantically. I hadn't touched it. I crouched down, examining the text. It was a handwritten journal, dated over 50 years ago. The entries described a night janitor who had heard voices in the same archives. They spoke to him, instructed him, guided him. And in the final entry, the words were smeared in ink, as if the writer had been shaking uncontrollably. They won't let me leave. They are everywhere. Watch the cameras. Watch the cameras. A chill ran down my spine. I glanced at my phone and realized that I had been recording the whole time. I opened the footage. The room looked normal on the screen, until a shadow passed behind me. I spun around. Nothing. Only rows of silent books. I backed out slowly, locking the door behind me. The whispers followed me down the hallway. Not in my ears this time, but inside my head. They seemed to echo my thoughts. You can't leave. You belong here. I tried to ignore it the next few nights, telling myself it was just stress. But the strange events escalated. Books would fall off shelves, not just in the archives, but throughout the library. Pages were torn out, scattered, sometimes forming words on the floor. Don't go. I began to notice something unsettling about the security cameras. On nights when I had left my phone recording, reviewing the footage showed figures appearing behind the glass, walking silently between stacks of books. They never approached the camera directly, but they were always there watching. One night, I decided to confront whatever it was. I set up 3 cameras, one on the floor, one at eye level, and one in the ceiling corner. I turned off the lights, leaving only my flashlight. I walked to the far end of the restricted archives and whispered, "I'm not afraid of you." The temperature dropped immediately. My breath fogged in front of me. The whispers returned, louder now, overlapping, urgent. They spoke simultaneously, impossible to decipher fully. But the message was clear. You shouldn't be here. We see you. Suddenly, one of the cameras caught movement. A figure, pale and indistinct, glided between the shelves. Its face was shadowed, but the eyes were bright, reflective, and fixed on me. I froze, flashlight trembling in my hand. The figure passed through a wall and disappeared. I didn't sleep that night. I reviewed the footage over and over, and something became painfully clear. The figures in the library were aware of the cameras. In some frames, they seemed to pause, looking directly at the lenses, as if observing me through both my eyes and the digital recordings. The following week, the disturbances increased. The whispers weren't just in the archives anymore. They followed me into every wing I cleaned. I began hearing them in the main lobby, in the bathrooms, even near the stairwells. Sometimes they mimicked my own voice. "Michael, why are you here? You should leave." One night, I was cleaning the second-floor stacks when I saw it again. A shadowy figure standing at the end of the aisle. It didn't move initially. I froze, flashlight shaking. Then it raised its hand slowly and pointed at me. I felt an instinctive fear I'd never experienced before. Something inside me screamed to run, but I couldn't move. I blinked. When I opened my eyes again, the figure was closer, almost beside me. The temperature dropped further, icy and suffocating. I swore I felt hands brush against my shoulders, though no one was there. I stumbled backward, knocking over a ladder, the clatter echoing through the library. The shadow dissipated instantly after that night. I refused to enter the restricted archives, but the phenomena followed me everywhere. On the cameras, I started noticing subtle changes. Empty hallways suddenly had reflections of figures in the glass. Stairwells that should have been empty appeared populated with indistinct silhouettes. Even when I wasn't recording, I could feel their gaze. I tried to report it to my supervisor. I told him about the shadows, the whispers, the strange activity captured on cameras. He dismissed me, suggesting I was imagining things. But that didn't explain the footage. When I tried to show him, the files were corrupted, frames missing, shadows obscured. The more I recorded, the more the figures seemed to interfere with the recordings themselves. Sleep became nearly impossible. I could hear whispers in my apartment, faintly, like a radio left on at low volume. My friends noticed my exhaustion, but I told them it was just work stress. It was worse than stress. The library, or whatever haunted it, had followed me home. The final night I worked there, I made a choice. I went into the archives one last time, determined to capture proof of the activity. I left every camera running, every light off. I walked slowly among the stacks, whispering to the shadows. I know you're here. Show yourself. The temperature dropped sharply, and my flashlight flickered violently. I felt pressure on my chest, and the whispers were deafening. Overlapping voices, urgent, commanding. Then I saw them, dozens of indistinct figures moving between the shelves, faces pale, eyes hollow, staring at me. One reached for me. I screamed and ran blindly. When I emerged from the archives, I found the building empty and silent. The cameras recorded nothing, but the next morning when I reviewed the footage I had left running at the main entrance, there was one frame I could not explain. A pale figure standing behind the glass doors, staring at the camera with hollow eyes, a faint smile curling across its face. I quit that night. I never returned, but sometimes, when I close my eyes, I hear the whispers, and I know they are still there, waiting for the next night janitor to enter the archives. To listen, to follow the instructions, and never leave. Let's move to our third story. Started as a simple night shift at the elementary school where I worked as a janitor. The building was old, with narrow hallways, creaky floors, and walls lined with colorful murals from generations of students. I had always loved the quiet night hours. The stillness made the place feel peaceful. At least it didn't, the whispers began. The first time I heard them, I was sweeping the gym floor. It was late, just past 10, and the moonlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows that danced across the polished wood. I thought I heard faint giggling. At first I laughed it off, thinking it was the acoustics carrying the sound of a branch tapping against a window. But then I realized there were no windows near that spot, and the sound was coming from inside. I followed the sound down the hallway. The laughter stopped abruptly when I reached the corner. That was when I noticed the small handprints on the glass doors leading into the music room. They were tiny, far too small for any student I knew, and perfectly clean. The doors were locked. I pressed my hand against the glass, and that's when I saw them. Eyes, pale and round, staring at me from the darkened room. I jumped back, my heart hammering. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a reflection, anything to rationalize what I had seen. But the feeling didn't go away. It was like something was watching me, waiting, just beyond the corners of my vision. The next few nights, the whispers became more distinct. At first, they were soft, barely audible. "Come play," they said, in childlike voices that seemed to echo inside my skull. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was my imagination running wild. But then I began seeing small shadows moving against the walls, shapes too tall or too twisted to be real children. They didn't walk. They glided, almost slipping along the surfaces like smoke. One night, I was cleaning the art room when I found a single shoe on the floor. It was tiny, delicate, with a faint pink ribbon. I didn't remember seeing it before. I picked it up, intending to leave it on the counter for the morning staff. As soon as I touched it, a whisper filled the room, louder than anything I had heard before. "Put it back." I dropped the shoe. It landed softly on the floor, though I swear I didn't move my hand. The whispers continued, overlapping, coming from every direction at once. I felt trapped, unable to move, unable to think clearly. I backed toward the door and ran out, locking it behind me. The next day, I tried to speak to the school principal. I mentioned the noises, the shadows, the strange occurrences. She smiled politely and said the building was old, that strange drafts and noises were common, and that perhaps I was just stressed. But I knew what I had felt, and what I had seen. The phenomenon intensified. Items began appearing where I hadn't left them. The tiny shoe was not alone. More appeared: mittens, pencils, crayons, dolls. They seemed arranged deliberately, almost like a trail leading deeper into the school. Each night, the whispers grew more urgent. Come play. Stay with us. I started documenting everything. I left a small recorder running as I cleaned, hoping to catch something on tape. Reviewing the recordings, I heard distorted childlike voices repeating my name. But the words were twisted, like a broken rhyme. It wasn't just auditory. The visual evidence was terrifying. On several frames, shadowy figures stood in corners of the rooms, pale faces and wide eyes staring directly at me. One night, I followed the trail of items into the old basement. The basement was mostly unused, filled with dusty furniture and old classroom materials. The whispers led me to a small storage closet. Inside, the air was colder than anything I had experienced. The walls were lined with drawings, hundreds of them, all depicting the same scene. A janitor, alone in a dark school, surrounded by pale, smiling children with hollow eyes. I stumbled backward, nearly falling over a stack of chairs. The whispers grew louder, almost chanting now. Stay. Play. Don't leave. The temperature dropped further. I could see my breath in the dim light. Then I noticed movement in the corner of my eye. Shadows rising from the floor, twisting, forming shapes that resembled children. They weren't fully solid, but they weren't fully transparent either. I felt their gaze on me, cold and unrelenting. I ran back up the stairs, but the basement door slammed behind me before I could reach it. The hallways of the school felt longer than usual, twisted in angles that shouldn't exist. When I reached the gym, I looked back. The shadows were gliding after me, following silently, staying just at the edge of my vision. Sleep became impossible. At home, I felt the whispers in my mind. The tiny shoes, the mittens, the dolls. They began appearing in my apartment, not always in the same place, but always where I could see them immediately upon waking. I knew they weren't real children, but I could feel their intent. They were drawing me back, tethering me to the school, to the basement, to the shadows. One night, I resolved to confront them fully. I returned to the school, armed with nothing but my flashlight. The halls were silent, except for the faint giggling that seemed to follow me. I reached the basement door, and the whispers erupted into a cacophony of voices, overlapping, chanting, screaming my name. I opened the door slowly. The basement was empty, or so it appeared. The drawings on the walls glowed faintly in the flashlight beam. Then I saw them, dozens of tiny shoes moving on their own, arranging into patterns on the floor. Shadows rose from the floor like smoke, forming humanoid shapes with impossibly large heads and eyes that reflected the dim light. I felt my body cease. I could hear every heartbeat, every breath, as if the building itself was amplifying my fear. The shadows swirled closer, whispering my name, calling me to join their play. I stumbled backward, tripping over a doll. The whispers stopped abruptly. Silence. Absolute. I ran. I don't remember how I made it out of the school, but I left the building for good that night. The items, the shoes, the mittens, the dolls never followed me home again, but the whispers lingered. At times, in the quiet, I hear them again. A faint giggle, a whisper in my ear, inviting me back to play. Just for a moment, I've told few people this story. They don't believe me, of course. Who would? A janitor being haunted by childlike shadows in an old school. But the memories are vivid. The fear is real. I avoid quiet schools, abandoned buildings, and long hallways. The whispers, however, they never leave. They are a reminder that some places, some shifts, and some children never truly rest. Even now, when I close my eyes, I see the shadows moving just beyond the corners of my vision. The pale eyes, the giggling voices, the tiny shoes lined up like an invitation. And I know that somewhere, in some forgotten corner of that school, they are waiting for the next janitor to enter and play with them. Let's move to our fourth story. I had always considered myself practical, someone who didn't believe in superstition or the supernatural. That belief was shattered during my summer job as a night janitor at an old antiques warehouse downtown. The building was vast, with high ceilings, narrow corridors, and shelves stacked with relics, furniture, and artifacts collected over decades. Most of the items were harmless, dusty curiosities. Some, however, carried a sense of weight, as if the air around them was colder, heavier, almost expectant. It started with a mirror. I didn't know its history, just that it had been placed in a corner of the warehouse, leaning against the wall. The frame was ornate, gold-leafed, with intricate patterns that seemed to twist under the dim fluorescent lights. I had no reason to touch it, but for some reason, that night, I did. When I wiped the surface, my reflection seemed wrong. My movements were slightly delayed, and my eyes looked darker than usual. I stepped back, shaking my head, assuming fatigue was playing tricks on me. That was the first night. The next few nights, things escalated. I would pass the mirror during my rounds and catch glimpses of movement that didn't match my own. Shadows shifted in ways they shouldn't, and my reflection sometimes lingered when I had turned away. I started avoiding it, keeping my distance, but the feeling of being watched never left. One night, while cataloging items for the warehouse, I heard faint whispers emanating from the corner where the mirror stood. At first I thought it was the old building settling, but the whispers became clearer. Fragmented words, urging me, commanding me. I strained to listen. They were speaking my name, Alex. Look, you can't leave. You belong. I froze. I had no one else in the warehouse with me. My heart pounded, and my instincts screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. It was as if my feet were rooted to the floor. The reflection in the mirror began to warp, my own face twisting into something unrecognizable. Eyes sunken, mouth curled into a sinister grin. I turned away, gasping, and the whispering stopped. Sleep became difficult. I began dreaming of the mirror. Vivid nightmares, where it consumed rooms, swallowed me, and replaced my reflection with a hollow-eyed version of myself. The dreams followed me into the day, lingering, gnawing at my focus. Determined to understand, I researched the mirror's origin. According to old warehouse records, it had been imported from Europe in the early 1900s. There were rumors that it belonged to a collector, who had vanished mysteriously, and anyone who had owned it afterward reported strange occurrences. Some disappeared. Some were found in catatonic states, staring at their own reflections for hours. I didn't believe everything I read until the mirror started communicating with me directly. One night, I passed it and froze. My reflection smiled, though I hadn't. Words formed on the glass, as if etched by some invisible hand. Looked closer. You will see. Hesitant but compelled, I stared. The glass rippled like water, and I saw things I shouldn't have. Scenes of past warehouse occupants, terrified and screaming, their faces distorted, their eyes wide with fear. Then the vision shifted, showing me bound and kneeling before the mirror, whispering to my own reflection. I gasped and stumbled backward. I tried to avoid the mirror altogether, cleaning the other sections of the warehouse, refusing to look, but the effect followed me. Items would move slightly when I wasn't looking. Shadows lingered, always near the corner where the mirror stood. I began to feel a presence behind me, mimicking my movements, breathing when I held my breath. One night, curiosity overcame fear. I approached the mirror with a flashlight. The whispers returned, louder this time, closer, closer, don't look away. My reflection seemed to reach toward me, moving independently. I raised my hand, and it did the same. I could feel an invisible pull, like gravity bending toward the glass. The moment I touched it, I felt a sharp coldness, like ice running through my veins. The warehouse lights flickered violently. My reflection smiled wider than humanly possible. I screamed and ripped my hand away. The whispers ceased. Silence filled the building, heavy and oppressive. I decided then that I needed help. I brought a friend, someone rational, someone who would validate that I wasn't losing my mind. Together, we attempted to remove the mirror from the warehouse. It was heavier than it should have been, as if it resisted our efforts. When we finally moved it into the truck, I swore the reflection shifted, looking out at us with eyes full of rage. That night, I locked the mirror in my apartment storage, thinking I could contain it. But the whispers followed. My dreams were now filled with the same twisting visions, shadowy figures, distorted faces, the mirror consuming spaces, and me trapped within its glassy prison. I woke each morning drenched in sweat, my reflection in the bedroom mirror occasionally flickering, momentarily showing that hollow-eyed version of myself. Days passed, and I became more paranoid. I began documenting everything, taking photos and videos. In each recording, my reflection acted differently than I did. Small movements, which is smiles. Gestures happened when I wasn't paying attention. The mirror was alive, or something was trapped within it. I sought out experts, trying to find anyone who could explain or remove it safely. Antiquarians, historians, even paranormal researchers. They all warned me the mirror was dangerous. Some said it was cursed. Others said it was a trap for souls. They all advised against looking directly into it. But avoidance only fueled my anxiety. Every night, I felt its pull, a gravitational tug toward the glass. One night, during a particularly intense episode, I accidentally left the storage room unlocked. When I returned, the mirror had shifted position slightly. My apartment was empty, yet I felt watched. I approached the mirror reluctantly, and the whispers began again, urgent and insistent. "You can't leave. You belong here." I realized the mirror wasn't just showing me visions. It was learning me, observing my fears, exploiting my weaknesses. I started to feel its influence seep into my daily life. Mirrors at work, reflections in windows. Even polished surfaces at home would flicker for a split second, showing that same distorted reflection. I was no longer safe anywhere. I decided to leave the city. I took the mirror back to the warehouse, hoping it would be contained there. But even as I locked it back in its original corner, I felt its presence, cold and oppressive, aware, patient. I left, but the whispers never truly stopped. Sometimes, when I pass by a reflective surface, I see it, smiling just for a moment, reminding me that it is still watching, still waiting, and that some objects are never meant to be disturbed. The mirror taught me a lesson I will never forget. Curiosity can be deadly, and some things, though they appear inert, ordinary, or beautiful, hold darkness that can follow you far beyond the walls they inhabit. Even now, I keep my eyes briefly on every reflective surface, half expecting that hollow-eyed version of myself to smile back. And I know, somewhere deep down, it is waiting, patient, hungry, eternal. Let's move to our fifth story. I was hired as a janitor at an old motel on the outskirts of town, a place most people avoided. The locals called it the Hollow Pines, though the name alone wasn't ominous. What made it notorious were the stories. Guests checking in and never leaving. Shadows in the hallways. Whispers in the dead of night. I didn't believe in such tales. I had a job to do, and the pay was good. My first night started quietly. The motel was old, wooden floors creaking underfoot, dim fluorescent lights flickering in the hallways. The front desk was empty, and the night manager had left a simple instruction: clean, restock, and report anything unusual. I laughed to myself. Unusual was relative. As I began sweeping the lobby, I noticed a pattern of dust marks leading to the elevator. Odd, since the elevator hadn't been used in years. Marked out of service. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. The doors were slightly ajar, and as I peered inside, I thought I saw a figure step back into the shadows. I shook my head. Old building. Probably just a trick of the light, I muttered. But the sense of being watched didn't fade. It followed me through the hallways, whispering just at the edge of hearing. The first incident occurred around midnight. I was cleaning room 27, empty according to the records. As I dusted the dresser, the mirror reflected someone standing behind me. I spun around, no one. The reflection remained, though a pale, indistinct figure that flickered in and out of focus. My pulse quickened, but I told myself it was fatigue, hallucination from long hours. By the second week, things escalated. Guests, if they could be called, that seemed to appear and disappear. Hallways echoed with footsteps when no one was present. Sometimes, I'd hear laughter, low, childlike, yet distorted, reverberating off the walls. At first, I thought I imagined it, but then I found footprints in dust-covered corridors, leading nowhere. They were tiny, far smaller than any adult's shoes, but far too precise to be random. One night, I was cleaning the pool area. The water reflected the moonlight eerily, and I noticed something strange. A figure standing at the far end, watching me silently. Its form was human, but the features were indistinct, blurred, as if underwater. I blinked, and it was gone. My heart pounded. I began keeping notes, documenting the incidents. Each day, they became harder to rationalize. Rooms would rearrange themselves overnight, Towels folded in shapes I hadn't left them. Objects moved between spaces, always subtly, never blatantly. Sometimes, the whispers spoke clearly. My name, calling me to follow, to join them. By the third week, I discovered the true horror. The elevator, long thought decommissioned, operated at night. I never touched it, but occasionally the doors would slide open on their own. A faint yellow light spilling into the hallway. Figures would enter and vanish. Guests checking in during the day spoke of hearing children laughing, seeing shadows move along the walls, but none stayed past sunrise. One night, compelled by a mixture of fear and curiosity, I followed the whispers to the elevator. I stepped inside, intending to investigate. The doors closed silently behind me. I pressed a floor button I didn't recognize. The elevator began to descend slowly. Though the basement level was clearly marked as storage only, the descent felt endless. Shadows seemed to gather in the corners, pressing closer as the elevator moved downward. I tried to look away, but my eyes were drawn to the walls, where faint faces formed from the wood grain, eyes staring directly at me. Whispers crescendoed into a chorus, overlapping, pleading, angry. The doors opened into a space I had never seen before. Endless hallways stretched in every direction, walls lined with peeling wallpaper and dim lanterns. The air was cold, heavy, and smelled faintly of decay. I realized I had entered a part of the motel that didn't exist in any architectural plan. From the darkness, figures emerged. Children, adults, some fading in and out of visibility, their eyes hollow, their movements jerky, unnatural. They circled me silently, watching, whispering. I felt their intent pressing on my mind. They wanted me to stay, to belong. Panic surged. I ran, desperate to find the elevator, but the hallways twisted impossibly. Each turn brought me back to the same room, a long hallway with an old flickering lantern at the end. The figures followed, always silent now, yet their presence was suffocating. I finally spotted the elevator doors in the distance and sprinted toward them. I leaped inside just as the figures lunged. The doors closed, and the elevator ascended rapidly, the whispers fading to a distant echo. I reached the ground floor, gasping, drenched in sweat, and the doors opened to the normal lobby. No one else was present. I reported the incident to the day manager, who laughed it off. Old motel quirks. Just imagination, he said. But I knew better. I had seen the hidden floor, the figures, felt their cold intent. The following nights, I tried to avoid the elevator, to ignore the whispers. But the hauntings followed me. Objects moved, shadows lingered, whispers teased. Sometimes, in the lobby mirror, I'd glimpse the hollow-eyed figures watching from behind. My coworkers never saw them, never heard the whispers. I was alone in knowing the truth. By the fourth week, the elevator began operating at night, without any prompting. Doors would slide open at random times, revealing the endless, twisted hallways. I tried documenting it, recording on my phone, but the files would corrupt, frames missing, shadows blurred beyond recognition. Audio warped into indecipherable whispers. I realized the motel was alive, or something within it was. It consumed anyone who stayed too long. Guests vanished without a trace. The missing reports the police filed matched the dates of strange occurrences. I pieced together the grim truth. The Hollow Pines Motel wasn't just haunted, it was a trap, a liminal space, where the building itself fed on human presence. Isolating and consuming. I couldn't quit immediately. I needed the money, so I continued, each night, more wary, more paranoid. I never looked into the elevator when it opened itself, never followed the whispers, but I could feel their pull. They wanted me, just like everyone else. One night, I heard something worse, my own voice echoing from the elevator, whispering my name. I froze, realizing the motel was learning, imitating me, preparing me for the moment it would claim me entirely. The final straw came when a coworker went missing during my shift. He had been assigned to clean the pool area, same as I had weeks before. The elevator doors opened and closed silently. The next day, he was gone, no trace, no record. I knew I couldn't stay any longer. I quit that night, leaving my belongings behind. I avoided looking back at the Hollow Pines, but I can still feel it sometimes, in dreams and shadows. The whispers haunt me. The hollow-eyed figures sometimes appear in the corner of my vision. Pale, silent, waiting. I've warned others not to take night shifts there. But curiosity seems to have a way of pulling people in. Some call it urban legend. I call it a warning. The Hollow Pines isn't a motel. It's a predator. And it always waits for the next night janitor. Even now, when I pass old abandoned motels, I glance at the hallways, half expecting to see the endless twisted corridors, to hear the whispers calling my name. I know, deep down, it's still there. Hungry, patient, eternal. Let's move to our sixth story. It began with a simple routine. I had taken a night janitor position at a corporate office building downtown. The pay was decent, the work predictable, and the building itself, though old, was well maintained. I thought it would be just another quiet night, cleaning floors and empty offices. But the building had its own rhythm, a pulse I didn't notice at first. The first oddity occurred in the early hours. Around 11 p.m., I was vacuuming the carpeted hallways when I heard the faint sound of typing. I paused, assuming the night's security guard had started a task on one of the computers. But the offices were all empty, or so I thought. I walked to the nearest office and looked through the glass door. No one. Yet the sound continued, steady and deliberate, as if someone were typing a long report. I shrugged it off. Old buildings creak and hum. Computers can turn on by themselves. Rational explanations, I told myself. The next night, the typing returned. This time, it was accompanied by soft footsteps, pacing back and forth across the polished tile floors. I followed the sounds, flashlight in hand, peering into offices. Nothing. No one. Yet the feeling of being watched settled over me like a weight. I began to notice other signs. Chairs slightly askew, pens rolling across desks, monitors displaying screens I hadn't activated. By the third night, my unease grew. I started seeing reflection shapes moving in glass panels and windows. Figures that seemed to mimic my own movements, but always lagging by a fraction of a second. I'd turn quickly, expecting to see someone standing behind me, but the hallways remained empty. Yet the sensation persisted. Someone or something was following. Always, just out of sight. One night, around 2 a.m., the whispers began. At first, they were indistinct, just the faintest murmurs in the air. I told myself it was exhaustion, that the long hours and monotony were playing tricks on my mind. But the whispers grew louder, sharper, repeating fragments of sentences. Look at it. Don't turn around. You can't leave. I froze. The sounds seemed to come from all directions at once. I tried to leave, but the hallways seemed longer than usual, the turns and corners twisting unnaturally. Every time I glanced back, I caught glimpses of a figurish shadow, tall and thin, barely visible in the dim emergency lights. It never approached directly, but it was always there, waiting. Sleep became impossible. I dreamed of the office, but distorted. Hallways stretched endlessly, fluorescent lights flickering and hums growing louder, monitors glowing with cryptic messages. I would wake, gasping, heart racing, only to hear the whispers echoing faintly through the empty building. Determined to confront whatever was happening, I began recording the noises with my phone. The playback was horrifying. Distorted voices repeating my name, keyboards clacking with no hands present, footsteps circling and pausing directly behind me. Shadows appeared in the videos, lingering in corners, sometimes leaning unnaturally close to the camera lens. One night, I entered the server room, a place I was told to avoid, claiming only authorized personnel had clearance. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and the temperature dropped immediately. Racks of servers hummed, lights blinking erratically. The whispers were louder here, almost a chorus, chanting fragments I couldn't fully comprehend. As I stepped further in, I saw it, a figure crouched in the corner, thin, black, its face obscured in shadow. Its presence was overwhelming, pressing against my chest like a physical weight. I felt panic clawing at my mind. When I raised my flashlight, the figure didn't move like a normal person. It elongated, stretching impossibly, merging with the shadows along the wall. I stumbled backward, heart racing, and the whispers turned into a low, mocking laugh. My own reflection appeared on the glass of a server panel, except it wasn't me. The figure's face had my features, twisted into a grotesque, leering grin. I screamed and ran. After that night, The building became unpredictable. Office lights flickered on and off at random. Elevators operated without anyone pressing buttons. Doors I had locked hours earlier were open. And always, there was the feeling of being followed, watched. Sometimes, I'd glance into a window or glass panel and see the tall figure mimicking my actions. Always a step behind. I tried leaving for a night. I told myself it was just fear, exhaustion, stress. But even outside the building, I could feel its presence. My apartment felt wrong. Reflections in mirrors didn't match my movements exactly. Shadows in corners seemed thicker, darker, alive. It was as if the entity had followed me, tethered itself to me, and I could not escape. Eventually, I confronted the only possible source, the building itself. I walked its hallways slowly, speaking aloud, demanding it leave. The air became heavier, the whispers louder, echoing my voice mockingly. The figure appeared, now clearly formed, humanoid but impossibly thin. Its head tilting unnaturally as it observed me. It spoke, though not in words I could understand. A vibration in my skull, a message conveyed directly to my mind. You belong here, always. I ran, finally escaping the building as the lights flickered and the doors slammed shut behind me. I quit my job immediately. I moved apartments, changed routines, and avoided tall office buildings. But the whispers never truly left. Shadows linger in my peripheral vision. Reflections sometimes show the tall, thin figure behind me, just out of reach. Smiling grotesquely, I realized something crucial. The building wasn't merely haunted, it was sentient, feeding on fear, drawing attention, tethering those who entered to its presence. I survived because I left quickly enough. But it will always be waiting for the next night janitor, the next observer, the next soul, willing or foolish enough to enter its halls. Even now, when I walk past office buildings late at night, I feel it, a pulse beneath the hum of lights, a whisper along the wind. Come back. You belong. And I know, deep down, it's patient. It always waits. Let's move to our 7th story. Never thought a simple janitorial job could change my life or endanger it. The building I was assigned to clean was an old university archive. A maze of forgotten rooms, shelves stacked with dusty documents, and a sense of history heavy in the air. Most nights were uneventful, the usual hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic, that is, until I found the camera. It was tucked behind a stack of old filing cabinets, in room 312, dusty and unassuming, with a small note taped to it that read, "Do not watch." I laughed nervously and set it aside, thinking it a prank left by a student or staff member. But that night, curiosity gnawed at me. I plugged it into an old monitor in the break room. The screen flickered to life, showing footage I did not recognize. The recording was recent. It was me at that very moment, cleaning the lobby, moving through corridors. My movements were correct, but the timing was slightly off. I glanced at the monitor, and it was as if the camera had captured an alternate version of my actions. One that lagged behind, delayed by seconds. A chill ran down my spine. I turned away from the monitor, telling myself it was a glitch. Yet the unease lingered. That same night, I felt it. A presence, watching, waiting. I dismissed it at first. Old buildings make you feel that way, I thought. But the whispers began soon after. Low, almost inaudible, barely more than a vibration in the air. Look closer. Don't leave. Join us. I tried to ignore it, focusing on my work. But each room I cleaned seemed to shift subtly. Objects moved when I wasn't looking. Papers I had neatly stacked were scattered across the floor. And every time I passed room 312, where the camera had been, the air felt colder, heavier, as though the building itself was aware of me. A few nights later, I decided to review more footage. The monitor showed my path through the archive. But this time, something was wrong. Shadows lingered in corners where they shouldn't exist. Doors I remembered closing were open, and in the far background, a figure appeared. At first it was blurred, indistinct, but as I watched, it became clear. It was tall, thin, wearing tattered clothing, face obscured by shadow, and it was following me. I paused the footage and leaned closer, heart racing. The figure moved independently of my recorded path, always lagging a few steps behind, mirroring my movements, yet subtly different. Its head would tilt unnaturally, or its arms would bend at impossible angles. I felt bile rise in my throat. The next night, the building seemed alive. Doors creaked open before I reached them. Footsteps echoed in rooms I hadn't entered, and the whispers returned, louder now, almost urgent. Come. Come to us. It is time. I tried to leave early, but the main doors jammed, as if someone or something wanted me to stay. Panic set in, and I hurried through the hallways, flashlight shaking in my hand. The figure appeared again, in the corner of my vision, disappearing when I turned toward it. Its presence was oppressive, a weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I realized the camera was more than a simple recording device. It was a tether, a conduit. The figure in the footage was not just a shadow, it was aware of me, studying me, learning me. Every time I looked at the monitor, it seemed to grow closer, more defined. It mimicked my actions, anticipated my movements, and whispered my name in the dead of night. One night, driven by fear and curiosity, I decided to follow the figure. I kept the camera running, leaving it on the monitor in the break room while I moved through the archive. I traced the faint echoes of movement, the subtle hints in shadows, and finally, I entered room 412, a storage space that had been locked for decades. The door creaked open, though I had not touched it. Inside, the air was cold, stagnant, filled with the scent of decay. The figure was there, partially visible, its head tilting unnaturally. It didn't move toward me, but observed, patient, studying. The camera I had found earlier was now in the center of the room, its screen flickering on its own. The monitor displayed footage of the room, but not as it truly was. In the recording, dozens of shadowy figures surrounded me, all mimicking my movements. I spun around, heart pounding. But the room was empty except for the single figure. I backed out, tripping over a pile of old books. When I looked up, the figure was gone. The camera, however, continued to record. I grabbed it, intending to destroy it, but when I turned it toward myself, the live view displayed me but not me. My reflection was twisted, hollow-eyed, grinning in a way I could not. I dropped it in horror. From that night on, the building became a maze of fear. I began seeing the figure everywhere, in reflections, at the edge of my vision, even in empty rooms as I passed by. The whispers intensified, calling my name, pleading, commanding. Sleep became impossible. Each night, I felt it closer, waiting for me to fall asleep. To enter its domain, I attempted to leave the job, but the building or whatever resided within made it impossible. Equipment would vanish, doors locked behind me, lights flickering ominously. It was as if it had claimed me, tethering me to the archive and to the figure. The final encounter happened 1 week later. I was reviewing footage, desperate for answers. The monitor displayed the empty hallway, but in the reflection, the figure was there only this time. It moved toward the camera, then toward me. I ran, but no matter how fast I moved, the figure mirrored me perfectly, closing the distance with every step. I stumbled into room 312, where it all began. The camera lay on the floor, flickering. I looked into its lens one last time. The figure was inside the screen now, reaching out. A whisper filled the room. "You cannot escape. Join us forever," I screamed, slamming the door behind me. But the sound was swallowed by the building. I quit the job immediately, taking nothing with me. But the camera remains, or something like it. I've seen glimpses in other offices, other monitors, faint images of the tall, thin figure. It follows me, waits for me, tethered to my presence now. I know one day, curiosity or fate will force me to look again, and when I do, it will claim me entirely. Even now, late at night, I hear whispers in empty rooms, footsteps in dark hallways, and I know, some objects are never meant to be found. Some shadows are patient, eternal, and they will wait for the next careless soul.